Do animals adapt to their environments through evolutionary processes? Well, as you know, if you've been watching this channel, evolution is false. I'm here to show people how evolution is false. But there are some ideas in evolution that I have accepted unquestionably for years. And this has been presented to me as a challenge that I have been deceived in this area. So recently, a viewer came on and challenged my view on this. I unquestionably, just fully accepted things like, polar bears being white, having white fur through, a mutation that allowed them to adapt to their environment, things like finch beaks and peppered moths and things that seem like, okay, this creature has adapted to its environment. And I've sort of gone along with that. I mean, of course, many creationists, actually, one of the reasons I think I haven't questioned this is because that idea I've never heard it really questioned by creationists before. And so I was a little bit taken aback with this viewer that came on and challenged me. And but I think because of him, I'm on the verge of a total paradigm shift on this, but I'm not sure about it. So this is going to be a little different than usual because I'm actually inviting you really to test this idea. I want to find out, am I wrong about this? Like, is this viewer wrong about this? And so I invite you to join the stream. I'm going to give a short presentation on this idea. And then I want you to come and share if you think organisms adapt to their environments through evolutionary processes. Then I want you to think of an example and bring it. And let's see, is it an example that we can, just using our scientific observations, figure out, or is it going to have to appeal to a scenario, an imagined scenario? So I'll invite you to join. There's a link at the top of the stream. And let me just get this set up for us. So the person who joined my stream recently, and I really highly recommend you go watch this. It's on the one about the cat claws that I did. But his name that he went by is XO, and I think his YouTube name is actually Blood Always Finds Its Level. So it was really awesome because normally I don't have a moment when somebody brings this kind of challenge to me that makes me realize that I might be wrong. So this was just shocking. So he said, look, there have been too many things that creationists have embraced. I'm going to read you some of his things, but his challenge is, if evolutionary adaptation is real, give an example. Give an example that doesn't have to appeal to things that we don't observe. And so I gave an example, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. But here were his points. If something doesn't have the ability to survive already, it's not going to survive. It's not going to gain an ability. That's a necessary antecedent. So it already needs to have the ability to survive in order to survive. So, and he says, look, this deception about evolutionary adaptation is continuing because even creationists are accepting this. But do we really have a reason to accept this? That's what we're going to talk about. So he said, if something were to adapt, it would have to have something that it doesn't already have. He said, either something has the ability to survive or it doesn't. There are no other options. Both options eliminate any possibility for adaptation, let alone evolution. And like I said, he challenged me to think of an example. And I brought XO the example of the polar bear. So I said, okay, well, let me push back on this. This is one of those things that, hey, it seems really reasonable. Like white bears, I mean, they're really similar to other bears, I thought. And hey, they just maybe got a mutation that helped their fur. And when I presented this, actually, as I was talking, I saw the flaw. I saw the flaw. I saw that I was using the same type of evolutionary reasoning, the same type of faulty assumptions that I reject when it comes to bigger things in evolution. And so the faulty assumption is that, I'm assuming this happened through a mutation and natural selection. I'm assuming this bear is white because it got a mutation that helped it adapt, that it just happened to, make it more able to survive in this environment. And so that was kind of a moment for me where I realized, wow, I am actually having to appeal to the same evolutionary processes that evolutionists are always trying to use on me that I reject. And now I'm using their stuff. This is so weird. And then I looked into it a little bit and I realized that actually the polar bear genome is like 3.5 billion base pairs. Now, evolutionists will say, hey, we compared the genome and this is only, 0.2% different. The polar bear is only 0.2% different than the brown bear. And so we think they shared a common ancestor. And now, but as I looked at this, I was like, wait a minute, but 0.2%, it doesn't sound like a lot, but for a 3.5 billion base pair bear, that's the 8.4 million changes needed to the genome. Oh my gosh. So 8.4 million, and like that's a lot of changes. And there's major morphological things that have to happen. So, like, basically, polar bears have differently shaped teeth, they have different shaped claws, they have like non slip foot pads that help them in the snow, they have a different, like, fat metabolism, they have like a bunch of different stuff that would have had to affect many of their genes in order for them to be able to have all the things. They have hollow fur. So there's a lot of changes that would need to happen. And I was like, whoa, I just took this for granted that the polar bear adapted to its environment. But what? Where am I getting that? All we know is that the polar bear is there and it has a lot of features that help it in its environment. We don't know that it adapted to its environment. God could have created it just like it is. Okay. So I realized as I was thinking about it, more and more of these ideas that I had about adaptation, that wait a minute, none of these are a good example of animals adapting to their environment. A popular one is the peppered moths, right? So pollution goes up, and then they look at the peppered moths and now, the peppered moths go down in population and the black moths go up because they blended in with the trees more. And then, lo and behold, the air gets less polluted because of the Clean Air Act. And then, wow, the peppered moths spring back up. Well, wait a minute. What actually happened there? Did anything adapt to its environment? Did anything change? Or did it just there were already black moths, there were already peppered moths. And, depending on the environment, one group survived more. That's not a change. When we're talking about for evolution, you're trying to get organisms to build themselves from the ground up. We got to start with one little cell and we've got to get all the diversity of life. And you're coming to me with moths that already have an ability. Wait, where did they gain an evolution? There's no evolutionary progress here. There's nothing. It can't even be considered an adaptation to the environment. Same with the beak finches, the Darwin's finches. Okay, we see more big beaks this year. We see more small beaks next year. these are fluctuations in population. But what is actually happening for evolution? This is nothing. So anyway, this is what I'm bringing to you guys tonight. And I do have somebody backstage, but I want to bring up a couple of things really quick. So, how if the polar bear adapted, how do we know it? We have to use the same evolutionary assumptions as we would for a bigger change. And then I wanted to bring up an objection from my favorite evolutionary biologist. And I don't know if I fully understand his objection, but his objection is that this might be just a semantic issue. Like maybe there's no real substance to what's going on in this argument. Like, does it really matter? And I can't speak for him about what he's exactly referring to, but that is one objection that has been brought up, is that, hey, this is all just words. Maybe this is like there's no real substance to the shift that I might be having in my mind here. Then, there's this issue with maybe a creationist objection. I mean, why is it that with all the creationist stuff that I've heard and listened to, why don't I ever hear people challenging this? Why do they fully embrace adaptation? And I am a creationist, by the way, but why do creationists, like I really don't hear creationists objecting to this, evolutionary small changes, microevolution, adaptation to the environment? Why don't they challenge it? And so it was brought to my attention that maybe one of the reasons they don't challenge it is because if it's not true, then how did all the species get on the ark? You see, we need smaller numbers. We need diversification since the ark, because there's no way that if we put every species on the ark that it's going to fit on the ark. We have to narrow down to the kinds. We need to narrow down. And so, this might be a motivation to, hey, we believe in adaptation, hey, we got no problem with that. Well, the thing about it is, let's figure out what's true. Let's figure out what's true about the world. It might be inconvenient for my position, right? It might be inconvenient. It might rattle my ideas about, the ark, the flood, everything like that. But let's just find out what's true. Do animals adapt to their environments or not? If they don't, let's stop saying that. And I'm getting to where I can't think of any examples myself of adaptation through evolutionary processes, but I'm open to hearing other perspectives. And I do want to say one thing about it. Now, when I say no adaptation, I'm not saying they don't have change. There's things that happen, such as genetic drift, which evolutionists will consider that evolution. But and things like, okay, there might be an ability that comes out because, organisms can shift and splice their genes and do different things to make what is needed for their environment. But remember, that's all stuff that's already present. So genetic drift has to do with what's already present moving around. Same with gene flow. It's all about what's already present moving around. And that's the same with, if we're talking about an intentional adaptation, that's an ability that the organism already possesses. That is not evolutionary progress of mutation plus natural selection, getting, evolution to build the diversity of life, whether on small changes or big changes. So with that, I will bring up Dr. Thompson.
Hello. I'm okay. How are you?
Great.
Good deal. And you can hear me okay, I take it?
Yes.
All right. So, your objection is that adaptation is a phenomenon that just is unproven, or you're skeptical that it happens at all? Well, unpack this a little bit for me. So let's go to the peppered moth a little bit, just so that I can understand. And let me sort of set the stage. You did some already, but basically that we have these two variants of colors within the peppered moth. There's a dark variant and a light variant. There's variation that exists within the population, and the description of, this is as this an example of adaptation, is that it's a change in the proportion of the light variant versus the dark variant over time as the environment changed, as you said, like with pollution. But I think you're just, so I'm steelmanning you here. I think your objection is that you don't see this as an example of evolutionary novelty because these variants already existed. Is that the complaint? And so therefore there is no change.
Right.
Okay. But there is
What
change,
change?
at least in the proportion of
Yeah.
individuals that are able to survive within the
Right.
population based on this morphology that exists.
Yes.
Okay.
But
So at least,
remember, what
yes.
we're talking about, we have to get evolutionary progress
Right.
somewhere,
I
right?
see.
Not
The
just
issue is
moving
that the
stuff
population,
around that the
right.
things already have.
I see. So
Yeah.
you're saying the issue is that the population already has these two color morphs, and what you want to see is like novelty coming about.
Yes.
Okay, that's the objection. All right. So I have an example if you would like.
You do, hey, look, I'm just going to let you know, Dr. Thompson, I am more open-minded than I usually am
I
on this
figured that,
issue.
yes. And I don't know if you're going to have too many objections to what I'm going to show you, because I actually
Okay.
think it's kind of neat. And look, it's going to be on something that we kind of have already talked about, except that we haven't
Okay.
talked about this particular paper or this particular um, gene. So let me bring up my presentation here. I have to get it going and bring it into StreamYard. I should have done this beforehand. I apologize.
That's fine.
Yep.
I'll
Boom,
look at the
boom, boom.
chat while you're
Okay.
doing that.
Yes. If there's anything
And I
exciting
know
in
I
there.
realize we're competing with football right now, so hey,
Oh goodness.
are you
Bad.
only the non-sports fans are here. Oh, well, I don't have my
Yeah,
glasses,
I
so I'm
I'm
not
not
able to
a
check the chat.
giant sport. Like,
Ah,
it's fine. I'm not huge into
oh,
football.
wait,
I
I
actually
have
more
some.
into basketball than football, but um yeah.
There we go. Okay, let me bring up your
Okay.
thing. Okay.
Yeah, so we're talking about dogs again. Dogs and
Okay.
wolves. So I think dogs are an excellent example for looking at evolutionary novelty, because it's really going to be like, one, they're very well studied, they're very well characterized. There's been a lot of recent change within this population, within this species, that is incredibly novel and interesting, and I think that it's really ripe for all kinds of investigations. We're only really getting started by addressing this. But yeah, like, so one thing though is that dogs do interesting things. Like, some do really amazing tricks. They're incredibly intelligent. Here we have a border collie here that's tracking this toy and moving along. Some can do like amazing things, like, sit still and hold position. There are some breeds though that are less well suited for doing certain kinds of tricks, and are well less suited for doing certain kinds of tasks. Why is that the case? They're all the same species, of course, we all agree at that. So they have been selected over time, and that selection has obviously resulted in novelty. And the other thing is that it's heritable. So we can breed different breeds of dogs together, and get new originations, and then you can have individuals within the same breed that get bred together that do different things too. I still have a lot more to talk about.
Oh, okay. I was
Yeah, it's
just
not just that one.
the motion was kind of annoying me, but
Oh,
okay,
was
yeah,
it?
I'll
All right.
put
Well,
it back
let's
in.
move to
I'll
the
put it
next
back
one.
in.
Sorry. Go ahead.
No, no,
Yeah.
no. Okay, yeah.
Yes. So this is
Okay.
a paper that just recently came out. It's called Genomic Evidence for Behavioral Adaptation of Herding Dogs. Okay, so specifically herding dogs. So that one of the things that's amazing about dogs is that there's enormous variation. Here's pictures of a couple of different dogs. This, of course, when you have these different breeds and you breed them together, it breeds true. Like, if you breed a Chihuahua, a male Chihuahua, and a female Chihuahua, you get a Chihuahua. You don't get a Great Dane, right? And if you breed a Great Dane with a Great Dane, you get another Great Dane. You would agree with that, I assume?
If you breed a Great Dane with another Great Dane, you're gonna get a Great Dane?
Yes.
Yes.
And same with Chihuahuas and, you know,
Yeah.
all the different breeds, right? And so that morphological variation, so first of well, let me go into the next thing. So we've already talked about this, and I think most people agree, including most creationists, and I think you even agree, that dogs originated from wolves, that they were bred from wolves. Human beings bred them from wolves. They're originated from wolves. They're even more similar to the wolf than the brown bear is to the polar bear, genetically speaking. Like it's 99.9% similar, more than that, I think 99.95. So they're incredibly similar. Dogs are originated from wolves, and biologists, if we compare the sequences and we do molecular dating, that split occurred probably around 30,000 years ago. Obviously you don't agree with that, but that's what biologists say. So but nevertheless, you do at least agree, and I think most people agree, that dogs originated from wolves.
I'm not giving you that, Dr.
No,
Thompson. And we had a
really?
huge look, we had a huge argument
Yes.
about this and you were desperately trying to get me to accept this. And
Yeah.
then, I looked into it and I was like, okay, the dog and the gray wolf or whatever probably had a common ancestor.
Yes.
But then you kept expanding it and getting it to, oh, the maned wolf, the bush
Oh,
dog, blah,
I'm
blah,
not
blah.
going
And,
there.
and I so I'm not giving you anything.
Nothing. So not
Nothing. This is
no
my
dogs.
policy with you.
So dogs and
Nothing
wolves. You,
because
you
you
think
push it.
okay?
Okay.
So I'm curious. Then, do you think the different breeds are separate created?
I don't know.
You don't know. Okay.
Hey, isn't it okay not to know things?
I suppose it's
Okay.
very odd given the genetic similarity of all these organisms. They all interbreed with each other. They can make viable offspring with each other. Dogs and wolves can interbreed to make viable offspring with each other. Of course, dogs and dogs, different
I'll
breeds of
give
dogs
you
can
that
breed
they
together.
likely had a
Yes,
common ancestor.
they
Likely.
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 Okay. I mean, we know that breeds. I mean, this has been documented,
Yeah,
right? In
yeah,
in
but
in
see, what
history,
we're
like
gonna
you can
do,
go into the history books and they have written down when a breed is originated, right? Like
and
you don't
I'm not
believe that that
disputing
occurred?
that, and I haven't looked into that.
Okay.
So
But
so you're
that
trying
is
to
the
get me
case.
to
Like,
answer from what I don't
okay.
know, and
We
you're
have
trying to get
historical
me to
evidence
trust. Yeah.
that dog breeds have originated and that like we get the emergence of new breeds.
Let's move on.
Okay. All right. I'm just saying it's crazy that you don't think that the different breeds of dogs are actually common to each other. All right. But
I'm not
anyway,
saying either
so
way. I'm not saying either way.
sure.
You're
Gotcha.
putting
All
words in
right.
my
You want
mouth.
to be
I'm saying I
completely
don't know.
agnostic about whether different breeds of dogs are related to each other, even though we got enormous
You
genetic
were trying
evidence
to
and
get me
historical
to
evidence that
do
that's the case. That's
dogs
fine.
with wolves,
Fine. You can be
and okay,
agnostic.
all right.
So I know I'm just saying that the different breeds of dogs are related to each other. I would like my argument doesn't even necessarily depend upon dogs and wolves share a common ancestor.
That's fine. All I'm
Okay.
telling you is I am not affirming or denying
Gotcha.
because I learned my lesson that if I affirm any part of it, you will push it more and more. And
No,
so I would rather just not affirm
fine. That's
so I
fine.
don't get myself in trouble with things I don't know.
I'm
Okay.
not going to be pushed. Okay. So
All right.
the one thing about natural selection, like I think it's really important just to go over what natural selection is, right? That it really it's kind of surprising that it took so long for a biologist to come up with natural selection. That it was Charles Darwin and Alfred Wallace that came up with these separately. And I think that there was some evidence that some people were kind of playing with this idea before, but it really is just the logical consequence of observing a few things in nature and then just playing out what that consequence is. One is that variation exists in the population, right? So, for instance, the within the peppered moths, we have these two colored morphs, right? So, and variation is going to exist on a number of different dimensions. So, I need that because I'm a spitty boy. So, okay, so variation exists in the population. That's just one thing that's a given. Like everyone can accept that variation exists within the population. Much of that variation is heritable too. So when you look a lot more similar to your siblings than you do to just some random person off the street. I look a lot more similar to my siblings than I do to any random person off the street. Certainly more similar to people of we've talked about this in the past, that like my ancestry is from Northern Europe, so obviously I look more similar to them than I do from say some random person picked off from the continent of Africa or in Asia or someplace, right? Variation is heritable. So that exists. Of course, dogs are the same way, right? Like we can also look at dogs and see that variation is heritable. Now, some variants are going to be better suited to survive and reproduce than others. And that's the one thing that I think Exo is missing in his argument. The focus is entirely on survival, but there's also the issue about reproduction, right? Like, so some variants in a population are just going to be better suited to survive and reproduce within that environment. That is just naturally going to be the case.
I don't think he was
You
missing
don't think
that.
so?
He just
Okay.
look, and he may have even said that word, and I didn't put
Yeah.
it in here. But to survive to the next generation is to reproduce, right? So we don't need to get
Sure.
caught up
Right.
on that.
You also have
So
to have the reproduction part,
I
right?
mean,
That's
look,
part of
so
fitness.
far, all I'm hearing is, we have dogs that have
Oh yeah.
variation, and we
Oh, I'm
obviously we
getting
know that.
there. I'm just
I'm
trying
not
to make
arguing
sure that the
against genetic
audience
variation. Yeah.
understands natural selection, okay? Because I don't think that you really gave a good description of it. So the other thing is that over generations, beneficial traits become more common or they become even fixed within the population. The last thing is that over time, isolated populations that diverged from a stock population will be so different that they can no longer reproduce together. That is eventually going to be the ultimate consequence of this process repeated over and over and over again. All right, that's natural selection. And this is a nice illustration of what this looks like. This is from the Stated Clearly channel. That you got variation of these different bugs, different color morphs. Some are better suited to survive than others. That one reproduces. Of course, there's still more variation because you get mutations that occur with every single generation. And then you can get change over time that can occur, right? I know that this is a just so story, but this is just an illustration of exactly how this might occur. Now, the mechanisms, of course, of evolutionary change, as you already pointed out, that we've got genetic drift. This is illustrated. Let me bring up my laser
But why
pointer.
does evolution get credit for moving around what's already there and for the survival of things that are already equipped to survive? Like,
Sorry,
why are these so do you understand what I'm saying?
No, go ahead and repeat it. I may have missed it.
Okay. Why does evolution
Mhm.
get credit for moving around what's already there and for
Ah,
things
yes.
surviving when they already have the
Yes, and
ability to
I
survive?
agree, and obviously migration, natural selection, genetic drift, that is entirely dependent upon the existing variation that exists in a population. Now, I think what you're struggling with, and I think that this is the crux of your complaint, is mutation, right? So this is going to be then the thing that gives rise to that variation within the population. We have mutants that offer some sort of benefit that can be selected for that provide evolutionary novelty. I think that that's the crux of your argument. Now, migration, natural selection, and genetic drift, those are the natural mechanisms by which we get change in a population over time so that that novelty can persist and become fixed in the population and then can lead to change over time, especially over, you know, thousands, hundreds of thousands, and millions of years. We get massive change that can occur with generation after generation of this process repeating itself. But mutation is the key. So, and that's going to bring me and to the next point, which is that we can have artificial selection as an excellent way of illustrating and better understanding genetic novelty and leading to evolutionary novelty. And so, for instance, all these different vegetables, these are vegetables that you can go to the grocery store and buy. I'm a big fan of broccoli. Cauliflower is fine. I've got a cabbage sitting in my refrigerator. Kale is fine. It's okay. It's a little bitter, but I eat it. Kohlrabi is very bitter, but whatever. They all derive from the wild mustard. We know that this is the case. The artificial selection has allowed for the emergence of all these different variants. These are just different parts of the wild mustard that has been selected for by humans. So artificial selection has allowed for enormous novelty that breeds true so that we can have the different kind of variants that we want to eat. Okay,
Right.
sure.
And so
Dogs are also an excellent example of this, and
right,
some
but
dogs are better suited.
artificial selection
Mhm.
is different, right?
It's
You're
not different.
talking
How is it
but
different?
well, because you're talking about people intentionally putting variations together and things like that to guide it in the process that we want, right? And it's
Gotcha.
still what's already available, right? Unless we intentionally mutate things, right?
Aha. I see. So you think that we can intentionally mutate things?
I don't I have not looked into this at all, but
Do
I'm
you think
guessing we probably can.
I
Yeah.
we can, of course, right? Obviously, we've got things like CRISPR-Cas that
Yeah.
allows for us to do direct mutation. We make genetically modified organisms. We're doing that already, right?
Right?
But that's not
Obviously,
how
yes.
these emerged. These
Okay.
emerged through artificial selection. It wasn't as if there were geneticists that selected for these vegetables because these were done, hundreds and hundreds of years ago.
Right, but that people were taking properties that they knew about one plant and intentionally doing something with it,
Yes,
right?
that's right.
So
There's an intent, right?
this is not an evolutionary
Oh,
process.
but it
So
is an evolutionary process. It entirely is. It absolutely is. I mean, how is it not? You have variation that exists in a population. There's a
okay.
selection pressure. Of course, the only difference here is that it's not natural selection, it's artificial selection. And then you can get novelty that can emerge. Now, that we know that novelty can emerge and it can emerge genetically. And that's what this paper is about. So, dogs, there's all kinds of different variant dogs. We can create new breeds. It's been well documented. We get new dogs. And some dogs are just better suited for certain tasks than others. Like here's a Yorkie, of course, they're very cute. They're not very well suited for doing herding tasks are really much else other than like licking the inside of your nose and being very cute. But border collies are very good at herding.
Okay, so
And
where's the
hmm,
adaptation?
we're getting there. So border collies, they have been bred to herd animals. They have a specific behavioral adaptation that you can breed for and breeds true, right? So if you breed different border collies together that do herding, you can have a border collie that will do herding most likely in the next generation. And they do this pretty much instinctually. Of course, there's a little bit of training that comes involved, but they do this essentially just naturally. This is an instinct. So one thing about selected traits is that it, of course, arises from the thing. It has to be within the DNA, right? And that it have, of course, DNA is going to make an RNA, which is going to be translated into protein that has to do something in the brain, especially if we're talking about something like a behavior, right? Because it has to affect the brain. This is just an example of one change that we know that has led to an enormous change in humans with just a single change, not even in the gene itself. CLBN2 is the gene that we're talking about here, but this is a regulator. So this is a side point, but I'm just illustrating that you can get a small change in the genome that can result in major changes in the overall morphology of things like the brain. Okay, so let's get into the paper. So this is the paper. This is genomic evidence for behavioral adaptation of herding dogs. Elaine Ostrander is one of the authors on here. She's like basically the leader of the dog genome project. Now, I'm not going to go through and read all this because this is actually for something else. But essentially, like you can have a single nucleotide polymorphism that is a common change within DNA. And we can look at the genome sequence of different breeds and we can
Yes.
see the differences. Yes. Right.
Right.
Now, and we can also have indels that can come about, right? We can look for insertions and deletions. These are all forms of mutation that are directly observable, right? So these are the changes that can happen to a genome. And with every single generation, any dog or human is going to have something on the order of around 100 novel mutations, single nucleotide polymorphisms, indels, or even bigger changes that happens to their genome. Like I am 50% my dad, but 50% my mom, but I also have novel mutations myself. So do you. Every single human being alive has novel mutations that did not exist in each of their parents,
And
right?
you think those are helping us adapt to our environment?
Sometimes. In fact, we can look for an example of this. I'm going to skip ahead for some of the stuff because we don't need to look at all of this. Okay. So basically what they did, well, let me go back to this because I think this is kind of neat. So, they were looking for genes that the variation in different breeds. They were looking at herding dogs, greyhounds, Portuguese water dog, Yorkshire terriers, and Tibetan mastiffs. They were looking at specific single nucleotide polymorphisms and indels that are specific to those different breeds, and then looking to see what genes are those associated with in humans. So they just compared it. This is called gene ontology analysis, and that's what this is. So they're looking at like, okay, here's a unique mutation within this category of dog, and now let's look to see what genes that these are associated with and what they do in humans. And one thing that they found in the herding dogs, I'm just going to point out the herding dogs here, is that these are the things that were highly enriched, meaning that they found a number of genes that seem to be changed in the herding dogs. And mostly, if you go across, They have one thing for hair color in the herding dogs. So apparently we have some genes that have been changed in herding dogs that are also similar in humans that are affected by hair color, highly enriched for specific mutations in herding dogs. But many of the genes that had been changed in herding dogs are actually related to intelligence, behavior, socioeconomic status, which is really hilarious. So things like educational attainment and intelligence were the ones that were most highly enriched. So these are the mutations that are specific to herding dogs, not in other breeds, that happen to also be genes that are related to be doing like mental type tasks in humans. Not a surprise given that herding dogs are incredibly intelligent animals. Okay.
Right. But you
Mhm.
know that I don't accept the common ancestry of humans and dogs,
I
right? So,
understand, but if there's a
yeah,
gene that does something in humans, do you think that it may do something similar in dogs?
it's possible.
Right. And most of almost entirely
I
it
mean,
does.
we've found
Yeah.
genes that are similar
Yes.
that do similar functions. So, yeah.
Most genes that we find like there's a like 10,000 different genes that can be expressed in the brain at some point, and that's true in humans, but that's also going to be true in dogs. Like there are very few differences in gene expression profiles that we're going to find between humans and dogs and mice. I mean, that's why we can study things in mice and understand like, well, how does this actually work in humans, because it's basically the same gene. And then that's also just of course really great evidence for common ancestry. You might argue that it's because of a common design, but whatever. I think that it's excellent evidence of common ancestry. We're not going there today. What we're going to be talking about today is FB2, okay? EPHB2. So this is an ephrin receptor. This is something that's highly expressed in the brain. And what we're looking at here is two different graphs from this study where they were looking at border collies, and they happened to see substantial change that is specific a specific set of haplotypes. So basically, changes to the genome that are specific to the border collies around FB1, but not seen in other breeds. Okay, so here's one gene that they happen to find. Okay, that was seemed to be that's unique, that has certain genetic changes that are specific to border collies, probably other breeding dogs too, as we're gonna see. Now, what are ephrins? It turns out ephrins play a big role in brain organization and brain development. Not going to go into it in incredible detail, but basically, you have ephrin ligands. They bind to the ephrin receptors, and FB1 is one of these ephrin receptors. And it plays a big role in defining how brain circuits organize. Okay. That's as much as I'll say about that. Um, Now, what they found is that this specific allele in FB2 was highly enriched in border collies. So nearly 75% of all border collies have this specific allele. And then they also looked in 422 non-herding dogs, and that not a single one of them had this variant. So what this means is that we have a genetic variant for a particular allele of a gene that's very important for how the brain grows and develops, that seems to be very specific to border collies that do this specific herding behavior. And we can look at 422 other non-herding dogs, different breeds. They're all different breeds, and none of them had this specific variant.
Okay, that's interesting.
Okay,
And
we're not quite
so,
done there.
okay.
So,
And by
so
the way,
once
wait,
there's
hold
because
on, Dr.
there's even
Thompson.
more evidence because this is actually a
I
fantastic
believe you.
paper.
I believe you. And
Yeah.
by the way, I do want to thank you for taking the
Oh,
time
sure.
to put together presentations like
Oh,
this.
honestly, I already made a video on my channel, so if anyone's
Okay.
interested in what I'm talking about, you can go to my YouTube channel. You can see a video that I made just on this. So all I'm showing you is basically the slides that I made for that.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm more open-minded than usual because
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure this out,
Right.
okay?
Yeah.
But now my question is, how do you and Blood, if you have a response to what he's saying, let me know. Because I'm thinking, okay, that's really interesting, but how do you know the source of those changes?
Oh, so we can get into that. That paper actually gets into it. So, because they
Okay.
try to hunt it down. So, there it turns out there's two different kinds of border collies, right? So we have border collies that are working. These are the ones that do the herding. And then we have border collies that are for show. Now, they are definitely related. Like they are more similar to each other amongst the dog breeds than any of them are to any of the other dog breeds. But border collies that are for show, they've been bred for a number of years, a couple hundred years, they don't really do herding very well. They're really good at doing show dog crap. And then the ones that do the herding, those are the ones that we always think of as border collies. They're the ones that have this instinct to do herding. Okay. So we can also assess basic ancestry for them as well to see, like, okay, do they come from one lineage or the other lineage? Are they border working dogs or are they border show dogs, which they refer to as C here? Now, basically, they're very separate ancestry. Obviously, there's some interbreeding that happens between the border working dogs and the border show dogs, which is why we have some ancestry of border working dogs that have some of the border show dog ancestry. But for the most part, so each of these represents an individual dog that's within this data set that they're looking at. So they have a lot of different border working dogs. They have a few, looks like 8 or so border show dogs. And as you can see, it's just a very distinct ancestry. So they're definitely segregated in ancestry. That's basically what this analysis shows.
Right.
Now, the other thing
But
that
wait, hold
Mhm.
on. But let's
Sure.
just stop right there and talk
Oh, sure,
about
sure.
this,
Yeah, yeah.
because so this is it, this comparison is all going back to your assumption about their history, right? And
Yeah, and
comparing the
based on genetic evidence and historical evidence, sort of like how we would do in humans, right? Like, I am of European ancestry. I didn't I never met
right?
my ancestors in Europe, right? That was several hundred years ago, but the genetic evidence shows that that's the case. And I also did talk to you about that we have we trace back our lineage to ancestors that came off of the Mayflower. That makes sense. So not only do I have a historical documentation that, like, that I, have an ancestor that was on the Mayflower, there's also genetic evidence that that's the case too. I have two different independent lines of
Right.
evidence. That's essentially what this is. This is the genetic evidence. I don't have the historical evidence here, but of course we know that, like, these dogs are related to each other because, like, the show dogs were bred from the working dogs.
Okay, and
I
so
think
wait.
that that's right.
And so you're saying the working dogs have the thing and the smartness stuff for herding, and the show dogs don't.
Well, we're not quite there yet.
Okay.
But yes, they don't the show dogs don't do herding naturally. The working
Right.
dogs do. So they went ahead and decided to do an analysis between the show dogs and the working dogs to compare, again, what are those genes that are most highly enriched, that vary the most between these two breeds, right? And sister breeds, really, because, like, they're basically the same breed, except that one is for show and one is for herding. And again, within this analysis, so this is a separate analysis, but once again, FB1 is one of these genes where we apparently have an allele that's specific to, it turns out, the herding breed and not to the show breed. And there are other genes here. They didn't look at these other genes, but there are other genes that are specific to one breed and not the other breed. Of course, they would have to do additional work on those. They decided to just focus on FB1 because they had these two separate kinds of analyses showing that FB1 seemed to be one of these genetic signatures that's specific to the herding breed and not to the show breed. So then what they went ahead and now they're looking at the different haplotypes. Okay. So they did an even deeper analysis of FB1 across a bunch of different breeds. So we have border collies, working dogs, border collies, show breeds. We have Enterbucher mountain dogs, which is a kind of Swiss mountain dog, Yorkshire Terriers, Rottweilers, Tibetan Mastiffs, Portuguese water dogs, and then wolves. Turns out wolves don't have any of these haplotypes at all. All of these haplotypes that I'm showing here are specific to dogs. These are unique haplotypes shown here. These are the specific, this is showing the specific place within the genome. That's what this refers to. These numbers refer to these areas in the genome. And then these are the different variants that are associated with this within this gene. And then this is the 5' UTR region. This is the 3' UTR region. These are the different exons. And then these are the introns in here. So we have intronic and exonic information, and we have these specific haplotypes that seem to be, this is just different variants that we can find in different breeds of dogs, all of which are unique to dogs, and we don't find any of them within wolves. Okay. But now one of these happens to be highly enriched within the working dogs. It also appears in some of the show dogs, but not the majority of them. It's about like 25% of them. It also happens to be really highly enriched in the Entobucher mountain dogs, which is super interesting because the Entobucher mountain dogs, which is right here, there are 4 different breeds of Swiss dogs. Like there's the Greater Mountain Swiss, there's the Bernese Mountain Dog, Entobucher Mountain Dog, and there's one other one. And Entobucher Mountain Dogs are the ones that do herding the best. So they are basically herding dogs for the Swiss dogs. The other ones do have some kind of herding things, but they do mostly like guarding than herding. But the Entobucher Mountain Dogs are really the top herding dogs of the Swiss Mountain Dogs.
Okay, let's go. Let's hurry it along with the details. But look,
Sure. But this is
so
this particular haplotype. So this sequence right here, which is unique, is specific and seems to be highly enriched in herding breeds that have a natural instinct to do herding that is found within this gene, which is really, really, really important for brain development. So
okay,
essentially what they do, so this is another way of looking at analysis of just comparing overall basic genomic tree and then also comparing then the genetic sequence of FB1. So basically, one thing we can see is that the working dogs and of the border collies and the show dogs of the border collies, they're more similar to each other than they are to wolves and the Entobucher Mountain. Well, of course, they're similar to the Entobucher Mountain Dogs and the Greater Mountain Swiss and the Bernese Mountain Dogs. But these guys cluster over here because this is a distinct lineage, right? They had their own separate ancestry of from some proto dog ancestor. And then the
well,
border
let's keep
collies, of
in
course, came
mind
from there as
you're
well.
assuming all of these things, right? Like you're
I
assuming.
suppose. Sure. Yeah. I
Okay.
mean, this isn't an assumption. It's really the logical conclusion based on the genetic evidence. Because
Well,
like
it's based
we
on
know that
your
it works in
assumption of
humans.
evolution.
So, sorry, what?
It's based on your assumption of evolution, and you're using the
Not
genetic
really.
evidence with the assumption of
Yeah.
evolution,
So
right?
I do you not believe that you can use genetic information create like a family lineage?
Oh, I do with humans.
But that's
I
oh, but you
assume the
can't do that
common
with any other
ancestor is
animal.
humans.
You can't do that with any other animal.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I
Why would
haven't
it work
spent a
in
lot of
humans and
time
not
doing this, and I'm not saying
yeah.
that obviously some, there are, animals that have a common ancestor going back a couple hundred years, couple thousand years. But uh, but what you're doing is you are starting with the assumption that these had to evolve from a common ancestor, right? So your
Yeah,
genetic comparisons are based on that.
the genetic comparisons are based on the fact that they are almost virtually identical to each other, except for these
Okay.
relatively minor differences. But these minor differences, as you pointed out, it could still be like hundreds of thousands or even millions of differences. It can still have an enormous impact. But
Okay.
it doesn't take
So,
much to have an enormous impact on an organism, is what I'm trying to say.
oh
And
yeah, I
so you
know.
can
I
have
mean,
this
one
single
mutation can
mutation,
kill you, right?
yes,
I mean,
or it can actually lead to herding behavior, which seems to be
well,
the
I
case here.
mean, that's what I'm waiting to see. So
Yes. So
now,
what this is showing then is the similarity for FB1. So FB1 is the haplotype that we're looking at is much more similar for the working dog border collies and the Entobucher mountain dog border collies. In fact, they're identical. Different than say the show dogs and the Greater Mountain Swiss and the Bernese Mountain Dogs, which don't really do this kind of herding behavior that the Entobucher Mountain Dogs and the border collie working dogs do. And in fact, basically, the conclusion we have to draw is that this haplotype had to have emerged at some point that was ancestral to the split between Entobucher Mountain Dogs and the Border Collie working dog. So this is basically showing the lineage of this haplotype that where there was this split that occurred. So it led to and was found within the Entobucher Mountain Dogs. There was crossbreeding that occurred between the Entobucher Mountain Dogs and the Border Collies, and the Border Collie working dogs ended up obtaining this novel haplotype from breeding from an Entobucher Mountain Dog. But it didn't get passed down into the Border Collie working dogs.
okay, the main issue that I'm having with this
Yes.
is the same thing that I ran into when the viewer challenged me and I produced because I was on your side 2 weeks
Oh, sure.
ago. Okay.
Mhm.
I would have said, yes, the animals can adapt to their environments.
Right.
Okay. So I
And
would have been
you
fine with small changes happening within, organisms to adapt to
yeah,
their
and you
environment.
agree that they do, right? Like the beaks, right? They change over time.
But
Your objection is
from
that
what
like
is already present, they
yes,
already have that, and
here
I'm not sure. Like I said, I'm still working this out, but
this
I'm
has to have arisen after the the split between the different breeds of dogs.
okay. But we're starting with an assumption. What I would like you to see is that you're running into the same problem I was running into when I gave the polar bear example to the challenger. Okay,
Mhm.
I gave EXO. I said, let me push back on you. Let me give you the example of the polar bear.
Right.
Okay. And immediately he said, yeah, push back on me. Let's hear what you have to say about the polar bear.
Sure.
And I started describing, okay, well, the polar bear, it seems to have adapted to its environment. And as soon as I started talking about it, I realized I had to make assumptions not based on scientific observations, but based on my ideas about how the bear got its white
Yeah.
fur. Okay.
Right.
My own assumption about how the bear got its white fur. So that is an imaginary scenario. It could be true. Okay. But do we have scientific evidence to back that up?
Right.
And so right now, what you're giving me is evidence that is very similar to what I was giving about the polar bear.
Not
And
really.
yet
I'm giving you a
you're
very
saying it's
specific
here.
genetic change, right? Like this is actually specific genetic sequences that are unique to dogs and seem to be unique to just really herding dogs that we do not find in wolves, for instance, and is related to how brains grow and develop.
Okay, now since it's not in wolves, then could that also be used as evidence that wolves and those type of dogs don't share a common ancestor?
I don't think so because this
Why?
is first of all, wolves and dogs do have an FB1, right? Like they have this gene. Like this gene, this sequence here, if we could look at it, it would be, it'd be tens of thousands of A, G, C's, and T's. What dogs don't, sorry, what wolves don't have is this specific haplotype or any of these haplotypes. These haplotypes, these genetic changes are specific to dogs. None of them are found in wolves. That's what this is showing here, right?
Right.
So all of these are specific to dogs, but they still have an FB1. And in fact, the FB1 sequence, if you were to look at the entire sequence, as I said, it's like 10,000 base pairs. Um, uh, it would still be 99.9% similar between dogs and wolves. It would be more similar between dogs and wolves than it would be, say, between wolves and probably, well, certainly the Maine wolf, one of my favorite canids, or jackals, or humans. It would be certainly much more different.
Okay. But
So it's just these specific mutations that must have arisen.
oh, wait,
That
there's the key. There's the
oh,
key.
sure,
Must have.
yeah. How else would you get these? Like
Ah,
these
see,
are breeds that didn't exist 500 years ago. So how would you get these?
well, look,
Where did they come
okay,
from?
now that's for you to answer. Okay,
Yeah,
look,
like
I
the
don't
most
have the answer off
parsimonious
the top of my
explanation.
head.
Occam's razor would say that this would have to have risen by random mutation.
Well, I don't know. I
Do
that's
you think that like what what would do this?
no.
What would give rise to these specific haplotypes?
Well, we could think of several different scenarios. Let's talk out possible scenarios.
Sure.
Like I said, I'm not I'm pushing back because I'm trying to test this idea. Okay? I'm not
Yes.
I'm testing this idea. So I'm not trying to be hard on you.
Sure.
I'm
I
really trying
appreciate
to
it.
figure out
Yeah.
what is true in
Right.
this scenario. But
Mhm.
let's just throw out a couple of possible scenarios. So let's just say there was genetic variation. Okay, for let's assume for a minute common ancestry dogs and wolves, and then we'll do scenarios where they don't have common ancestry. Okay, but we'll start with common ancestry of dogs and wolves.
Sure.
One scenario is there's there's a genetic variation that already exists within the population, it with reproduction and isolation. Okay, perhaps these herding dogs ended up with this set of, variation, and the wolves didn't get it, and the other dogs didn't get it. So how does that show?
So
So that's
you're going to say that
would you say that's a
mhm.
plausible scenario?
No, I would actually rule that
Why?
out. One, first of all, their wolves actually have a lot more genetic variation within their population than dogs do. A lot more genetic variation. So if you look at the population of wolves across the world, there's much more genetic variation when you compare wolves from, say, North America to Eurasia. Like there's a lot more variation within those populations, despite the fact that there are fewer wolves. Dogs are actually quite not so variable in their genetic variation. So, but then the other thing why this would have to be novel is because we can look at, I think they looked at like 100 wolf genomes. Not a single one of them had any of these haplotypes, let alone the haplotype that we're interested in, which is haplotype 1. So all of these
Okay.
haplotypes are unique to dogs. None of them are found in wolves.
Okay, so why is it not plausible that if they shared a common ancestor, the
Mhm.
wolf lost that particular
Right.
haplotype?
So why then would it only be in a handful of these breeds?
Well, that's not, I mean, I'm asking you if this is the plausible scenario.
It's not plausible. So the most parsimonious explanation is that these haplotypes, so these particular mutations arose through mutation. They happen to change the way FB1 is expressed or works, and therefore that then influenced how it works in the developing brain, which resulted in changes in how the brains of these herding dogs work and how they develop. And so, therefore, because behavior is a manifestation of the activity of neural networks, ultimately, those neural networks, if they have been changed due to some sort of genetic change, it's going to manifest itself as a change in behavior.
Okay.
And in fact, we know that
Well,
I forgot there's one more thing here. So one thing that these guys did is that they went out and they had a survey. So they sent a survey out to a whole bunch of people uh um looking at their dogs to see if they have the they did a survey to see how toy directed they are, which is one thing that like border collies do. They're very toy directed. They tend to chase toys because that's part of the herding instinct, right? So they looked for the dogs that are very toy directed versus the dogs that are not. They didn't. They just surveyed all these people. They just said like, tell us about your dog. Tell us how much they are toy directed versus not. Had a bunch of other things that were in there, and then they looked. Then they asked for samples from all these people, and you can see that it's like nearly 2,000 different samples that they evaluated here. And it turns out that the samples that had the herding haplotype were much more likely to have toy directed behavior than the samples that were missing the herding haplotype. So this clearly, like, so these are people that none of them knew that their dogs had a particular haplotype. The researchers didn't know it when they asked the survey. So, but this specific behavior is of being like sort of toy directed and herding and one and being like very focused on like gathering and herding things is directly related to this particular haplotype. So much so that the p-value here is 4.3 times 10 to the negative 4. And generally, like p-values that are less than 0.05 are considered significant. So this is a highly significant difference.
okay, we have a question from someone backstage. Neslig is
Cool.
backstage, and
Yes.
he wants to ask, can you ask if the haplotypes are nested? Do they form a nested sequence or a branching sequence?
That's illustrated here. So as best that we can tell, because they haven't looked across like all the different breeds, right? They've only have been looking at some. And in this particular haplotype, they're really only detecting in a handful of breeds. And it turns out it's probably not in all the herding breeds because there are other herding breeds that are not related to the Etobicoke Mountain Dog and the Border Collies. So there are other dogs that do herding. It's likely that they probably have other mutations that are specific to them. I mean that's what, of course, the Manhattan plot is intended to show right here, right? It could be one of these other genes that they didn't evaluate, but are different between the border collie working dogs versus the border collie show dogs. right? It could be ASB3 or a PTPRZ1 or any of these other ones. Or it could be that those other breeds may have other haplotypes, other alleles that are specific to those breeds that allow for the herding to occur in those breeds. There's a lot of ways to skin a cat, you could say.
Okay. And Nestleg just wanted to
Mhm.
say the comment that this is good evidence that these are mutations.
Yes, they're excellent evidence that these are mutations. Yes. This
Okay.
especially, the Manhattan plot, this is one way of definitely knowing that, like, these are gonna be specific, 'cause that's essentially what this is showing. It's like, what is the likelihood, and we were looking across all the different dog chromosomes, right? Dogs have 38 chromosomes, and, basically, it's looking at regions of these chromosomes where we see differences, in, the genomes of working dogs versus the show dogs, and if it gets above this line, then these are genes of interest for which then there are significant differences between the two breeds, and the ones that are higher are even more enriched in those breeds. That's essentially what this plot is showing. So these are all
Okay.
genetic differences, and anything above this line is considered like a significant change, a significant difference.
Okay, so I want to read this from Blood Always Finds Its Level. XO says wolves and dogs from the same pairs or from different pairs. It's not going to help adaptation. Everything keeps what is already available to be passed down.
I don't know what that means. What does that mean? Can you put that up again?
Okay,
I didn't
so
really understand that.
yeah, okay. So it's basically, but so,
Uh,
and this is kind of
from the same pair.
illustrating
Okay.
the scenario that I said, okay, let's take we did the common ancestor
Yes.
scenario. What about if wolves and dogs have a separate ancestor?
Well, I don't know if that changes this too much because essentially, um, when we looked at this other evidence from this analysis, this was a separate kind of analysis where they first identified this particular variant in the FB1 gene, that it was highly enriched in border collies, and they didn't see it in any of the non-herding breeds. So, at least assuming that all dog breeds are related to each other, um, and given the genetic variability that we see amongst dogs, like they would have to be. Like it's crazy to think that like these are all specially created kinds, especially since we have historical evidence that they have been bred. Like we know you can look at the historical record and talk, where they talk about like, oh, well, we have these dogs that have come about through breeding and like even more recent breeds that have been emerged in the last several hundred years.
Right.
Mhm.
And so, but have those emerged because of now I do know that there's dogs that have a lot of mutations that might be contributing to some of their unique features, but not really helping the dog out, right? Maybe making for a
Sure.
painful life or a diseased life.
Yeah.
So um I'm kind of looking to I mean I can definitely point out, okay, this could be a mutation because it's, anyway, like
Yeah, no,
there.
that's actually a really good point because, like, and in fact, that's one of the reasons why there's been such an intense focus on dog genomics and genetics, because there are these genetic diseases that we know that are specific to particular breeds. This kind of analysis of looking at the kinds of SNPs and indels that we see in one breed that's unique to that breed, that's different from all the other breeds. If we can relate that to a particular genetic disease, that can tell us a little bit about the underlying changes to the genome that may have resulted in that in that disease. And dogs are susceptible to that because there's a fair amount of inbreeding that occurs. And then, of course, there's less natural selection on dogs. So mutations that cause, like, say, cancers in some breeds of dogs, that can obviously be detrimental to that dog over and shorten its length of life for some time. But given that dogs are companion animals to humans, we can still breed them together. We can even give them treatment. We can take them to the vet to keep them going on and on and on. So, right, like there's ways that we can. There's less pressure to remove deleterious alleles like that within some breeds.
Okay. Well, thank you for bringing your
Mhm.
evidence, Dr. Thompson. I will think about it.
Sweet.
And Nestlig is backstage. He's been waiting backstage
Oh,
for a
good.
while.
Yeah, let Nestle on.
So
He'll
I'll bring
probably have
him
a
in.
lot better things to say than me. So,
No, you did a good presentation.
oh,
Thank
thank
you.
you. All right,
Okay.
take care. Bye bye.
Bye.
Well,
You
I
know,
probably would have a lot of things to say then. I think Thompson did a pretty excellent job. Oh, hello,
right.
Rebecca. How are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Doing fine. It's I've been a lot of busy, but aside from that, I'm doing fine. So, what do you want to talk about? Because I don't have a lot of time, only like 20 minutes, I think. Is it okay with you?
Oh yeah, of course. So what I'm trying to figure out here is if there's an answer to the challenge of, you know, can we specifically name an animal that has adapted to its environment through evolutionary processes, not what was already available in the organism, like not with the genetic variation that's already available, but with evolutionary processes.
Well, so one thing I would actually ask you is like, why would you exclude already available variation in the adaptation process? Why would you already exclude that?
Well, because an organism already has something, right? And so, like, and the reason this is coming up is because I have always accepted this this area of evolution, adaptation, microevolution. These are like things that I've always thought are non-controversial, and I always accepted them. But
Mhm.
then I realized when I was challenged to come up with an example of an organism that adapted to its environment, I couldn't do it without appealing to unknown things, without making up a scenario. Okay. And so that's why I'm doing this. I want to see, can we actually come up with an animal that has adapted to its environment without appealing to, something that relies on assumptions, about its history.
Like what are assumptions specifically? Like you mean mutations? Is it one of the assumptions that you are thinking about, perhaps?
Right. Yeah.
Right. Are there any other assumptions, or is that just the main thing?
Well, it's the how do we get information about what we think has adapted to their environment? And like, is that actually an evolutionary process that's helping it along? So, what I mean is like, okay, I gave the example of a polar bear, and I
Yeah.
realized that I had to appeal to a genome comparison in order to give the polar bear the mutations to get it to adapt to its environment. But that rests on an evolutionary assumption.
Like you assume, like you would assume that there were mutations along the line leading to polar bears, which gave the polar bear the attributes that allows it to survive in the Arctic.
Right. That's what I appealed to, but I realized that wait a minute, I shouldn't be able to appeal to that. All we know is that the polar bear is there, and this is what it looks like, and this is what its genome looks like. And anything beyond that is me making assumptions about the past.
But but I still have like I asked you this question before a few minutes ago, that like, why would you exclude the importance of already existing variation? Because that might be important in uh,
Oh yeah.
because like again, to bring up the example that Thompson gives of, like, if you want to like breed a new dog breed, for example, the existing variations is already important that you want to have. Now,
Right.
and in my business, like my what I'm doing specifically, like I'm in the plant breeding world. Like that's my main area of interest. I want to become a plant breeder. Want to perhaps breed a new variant of crop that could be important in the future for feeding people. And so the existing variations is very important for us as plant breeders. So I don't know why you would exclude that as something unimportant. That's just my main concern.
Well, it is very important. But this is we're trying to figure out what is true about reality. Is it true that life developed from a common ancestor and diversified into all of the life we see today? Like, through natural, chemical, and physical processes?
Oh, so
Or
okay, so
did God create with all the variation and these abilities to adapt to the environment? And so the variation that you're appealing to, yeah, of course the variation's important, but where did it come from? What is its source? And so,
well,
yeah.
okay. Do you want to finish first, or?
Well, I'm just saying I'm crediting God with the variation, right? Unless I have a reason to credit evolutionary processes with that. So, yeah.
Well, there's also something that we discussed like a few months ago. Like, I don't see any incompatibility between them. Like, you can be an evolutionist, quote unquote, and also believe in God. So I'm not sure why you would exclude the possibility that like God would have guided evolution somehow. But that's just my
No,
personal.
I'm not excluding that possibility. I'm just
Yeah.
trying to find out what's true about reality. And so, I've already come to the position that evolution has to be false. It can't be true, broadly speaking. But now I'm even questioning the parts of evolution that I accepted. Are those wrong too?
Also, like the polar bear example, do you now dispute the fact that polar bears are descended from brown bears?
Yes,
Or?
I do, strongly.
All right.
Because I realized it's not just a change in fur color. There's 8.4 million differences in the genome of the brown bear and the polar bear, and it makes a big difference. It's, differences in its morphology, its differences in its metabolism. There's many genes that are different because of that. So definitely now I would
Well,
not say that the polar bear, got all of those mutate like that. I don't think that's possible anymore.
well, it's actually also interesting because the from the, what I'm not an expert on polar bear, but from what I understand is that actually polar bear and brown bears are very closely related, even interbreed sometimes in the wild even.
Okay.
So
And
like I like normally like I would have heard from creationists that you have the bear kind, like polar bears and brown bears, they are still the same kind. So this is a bit of a new thing for me to hear that that you would even question whether polar bears and brown bears are related to each other.
I didn't have a reason to question because I wasn't looking into that. I assumed it was a surface thing of just maybe a single mutation or something that changed the color. But because I looked into it, I realized, oh my gosh, why would I think that there could be 8.4 million mutations that would bring about all of these amazing features that are unique to polar bears? So no, I reject that. And I have no scientific reason to accept that. But
Well,
I mean, we're focused on the polar bear, but the broader topic is, does any animal adapt to its environment without what is already present in its genome?
I would say that pretty much all adaptations would involve existing variations, because again those are also important for when we want to breed new crops as well. So it's not.
I mean, that's really interesting, isn't it? It's all available.
Why? But why would you say that is a problem? I'm not understanding
Well,
why you
because
would object to that.
no, I agree. I'm saying, wow, that's really an interesting observation that you've made. And I wonder, with that observation, why you would believe that evolutionary progress via mutation and natural selection is the way that life diversified from, a common ancestor.
Well, again, the existing variation is also a part of that progress as well. Or I wouldn't say progress, I would say process, but it's just the terminology you want to choose. But I think the one thing you may have a hang up about is I think you would assume, like, when a mutation, or like in the evolutionary just so story, you would say that a mutation occurs when it is needed. Like when a brown bear goes to the Arctic, it needs to have lighter fur. So now mutations occur to get those lighter fur. Am I accurately portraying your concept of the evolutionary hypothesis, or am I mistaking that portrayal?
No, well, what I understand from evolutionary processes is that this needs to be happenstance. Like, maybe there were, say, just suppose 1,000 different mutations, and most of them didn't help the organism, but one of them just happened to make the white fur, and that ended up helping the organism. And so, that is what was selected, because right. So
what you're now describing is actually the existing variation that I was referring to. Like even before, in fact, in most cases, the mutations which creates the variation existed before the so-called need for that particular variant. Like it's I like during your chat with Thompson, I looked up a fairly recent paper published in 2024. They sequenced the genomes of over 100 polar bears and also over 100 brown bears, and they found that that actually most I think all of the identified genes important in the adaptation of polar bears already existed within the brown bear genome, basically, or in the population. So it was maybe there exists a variant that is unique to polar bears, but so far as they have found that it's actually the most important aspect of polar bear evolution is existing variation that was already present in the brown bear population.
Okay, awesome. Well, that's the thing, is that, again, that's the part that, EXO is saying, look, we're seeing what is already available. We're not getting evolutionary processes to make new things to help the organism adapt to the environment. So do you think that's true?
Well, it's like we may be also getting a bit unclear, because the existing variation before for example, how do I put it? Like even before the evolution of polar bear, the variation within the brown bear population that also had to come to about at some point before that. What they say is the mutations that gave rise to these variations happened before the adaptation to the environment specifically. So I think when you hear existing variation, you might be thinking, oh, no mutation occurred, but no, they are not incompatible with each other. The mutations happened, and it's one source of the already existing variation that is the basis of further adaptation.
So you're saying mutations happened that would produce sharp
existing
teeth,
variation,
the padding for the polar bears, the white fur, the hollow fur. Like all of these things were already, they mutated, and they were like waiting they were just chilling.
No. Like it's not like the brown bears were already polar bears before they came into the Arctic. It's just the genetic variations already existed, but all it was required for them is to reach fixation, and in a particular combination to reach the phenotype that we observe in polar bears. Like for example, what's a good example? Maybe I can bring up dog breeds again. Like when a new dog breed is made. For example, are you familiar with Australian Labradoodles?
No.
It's basically a like the. I don't know if it's officially accepted as a new breed or not, but the people were trying to make a new breed called a Labradoodle. It's a cross between a poodle and a Labrador retriever, for example.
Okay, yeah, everybody's got the doodles now. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know that specific one,
Yeah.
but I'm very
Oh,
familiar with the doodles.
so the phenotype of a Labradoodle did not exist, but pretty much all of the genetic variation to make a Labradoodle existed before, but the phenotype did not exist before. So that's a bit of a crude example to explain how you can have the evolution of a polar bear, even though, like, if you go back in time and looked at the ancestral population of brown bears, you would not see. You may get a white bear, but you wouldn't say, "Oh, that is the polar bear we have today." But then over time, the alleles got stacked up in a particular configuration, such that you would see the phenotype of polar bear later on. In the same analogous way of how you can have a Labradoodle from a cross between a poodle and a Labrador. Yeah. Although that is not exactly the same comparison, because it's not. We are comparing dog breeds with a real population in the wild. It's a bit of a. But you still get the comparison, right?
Yeah, but what's interesting is that, I mean, you've made a lot of really interesting statements that kind of go along with what EXO is saying, that what the ability to adapt to the environment is already present.
And that's actually the case for most of the evolutionary process. Like I have not seen I've seen the argument before that this is actually a bit in the very early part of the 20th century, when, like, you may not be familiar with this, or you may be familiar with this, but in the early part of the 20th century, the argument of natural selection was not widely accepted by most scientists. It's just one of many hypotheses. You have the natural selection side. You also have a different side called they call themselves the saltational hypothesis, where they propose that no, natural selection is not the main mechanism for evolution. They say that, oh, mutation is the main mechanism of evolution. Mutation arises out of a need. So when a brown bear needs a white fur coat, then the mutation happens to get the fur coat. But then, of course, the natural selection hypothesis proposes that the most of the variation that is, quote unquote, required already exists, and it is just selected based on the environment. That's yes.
Yeah, I mean, but Nestle, so I'm just kind of curious now, because you're saying they already exist. These
Right.
this possible variation, it already exists. I'm really curious about, why do you embrace this idea of everything evolving from a common ancestor and developing by natural processes, while you seem to be saying, like, this variation had already developed?
Well, I'm not saying that all of the variation existed since the beginning of time, of course. I'm just saying that the variation that is responsible for the adaptation existed before the environment to which you adapt towards. Like, I'm saying that in the ancestor, folks, like, for example, going back to the polar bear population, the variation that existed in the brown bear population was needed for the polar bear adaptation already existed within the brown bear population. But of course, I'm not arguing that variation has always existed for since the beginning of time. That's probably the confusion that we have.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not necessarily confused. I know that you believe that it goes back into time, and I'm just wondering why you believe that.
Well, I actually, in the case of the brown bear example, I've put up one study so that you can look at that to see that they sequence these brown bear and polar bear genomes, and I'm not exactly familiar in how they do the analysis, but you can read it for yourself and try to understand it. And they found that at least among the genes that they have looked at, they didn't find any alleles that is unique to the polar bear. It already existed within the brown bear population before the polar bear adapted to the Arctic environment. That's
Right. But do you see the issue with like what we're appealing to when we say that? Because like I said, I accepted that without question. For most of my life probably. Okay, this idea of organisms adapting to their environment. And I gave the polar bear example when XO came on. But I realized as I was giving him that example, even as the words were coming out of my mouth, I realized that I had to appeal to an imagined scenario. So, like, do you see the issue there of like appealing to imagined scenarios rather than our scientific observations? Because you gave an imagined scenario. You gave a scenario about the brown bear and the polar bear. You gave a scenario that had to appeal to things that we don't observe.
Well, like in the case of my example that I gave about the polar bear, again, this is a one paper that I've just came across while you were talking to Tom. So I'm not hugely familiar with this particular paper, but to me, they are looking at the evidence within the genomes of the populations of brown bears and polar bears, and based on the analysis that they see, they came up with the conclusion that best fit their data.
But why does it best fit? Is it because to me, when I think about what best fits, right, what they're relying on when they say it's the best fit, they're relying on the assumption that these evolved from a common ancestor.
Or I'm not sure if that follows.
Well, like if you take let's say you're taking the brown bear and the polar bear and you're saying, look, of the bears, like these two look the most similar, so they shared a common ancestor. You're making an assumption, right? You're starting with the assumption that there's a tree of bears and that, because these are similar, they shared a common ancestor. It might be true. Okay, it might be true. But everything after that is all based on that assumption. So if you compare and you say, this bear has this, particular allele and this bear doesn't, so therefore this must be a mutation, then you're basing it all
that's
on
not
your
how it
first
works.
assumption.
But yeah. Well, it's not how they are not saying that the polar bear has this particular allele and the brown bear has this particular allele, and therefore it must be a mutation that happened in the polar bear. Actually, they do the very opposite. They show that the alleles that they are unique, or at least they're not unique. The alleles that are found within the polar bear are actually already found within the brown bear population, but they just reached fixation within the polar bear population. And you understand what fixation means, right? Like within the brown bear population, you have many different variants, but within the polar bear population, you have a few variants which already exist in the brown bear population. But in the polar bear population, it reached to 100% frequency or close to it.
Okay.
So it's actually the case is that the polar bear population seems to be a subset of the brown bear population.
Yeah, and that might be true, but either way,
well, based on the genome that we have of the brown bear and polar bears, it does. It is there's no. It's basically a paternity test almost, except at the population scale. Like if you. Are you familiar with the Amish?
Yes.
If you look at their genetic variants, we can see that their genetic variants are a subset of their ancestral population. If I'm not mistaken, they came from Germany ancestrally. And the same thing applies in the polar bear situation. We can see their variants, and they form a subset of the brown bear population.
Right. And so we can come up with the different scenarios that might be true. It might be true that yes, the polar bear is a subset, and that it already had all of that variation, and therefore it didn't adapt to its environment. It already had the ability to do that. It didn't adapt through evolutionary processes because it already had the ability.
Well, again, that's what I disagree with, because if the genetic variation already exists, that can facilitate the adaptation afterwards. If I have the variation needed to make a new dog breed, then that it doesn't exclude the breeding of a new dog breed, even if I already have the variation that I already require.
Right. And you can, give it a new name and it may have different features, but it's working with what was already present.
Well, it may have new features, but those are very important, because if those new features are beneficial to a particular environment, then that means that you can have adaptation resulting from already existing variation. Even if the phenotype did not exist yet, even if you don't see a polar bear specifically, you can still get a polar bear from a brown bear population, which already has the variation needed to make the polar bear. But I believe we're running in circles. Can we before I leave, can we go to a more simpler example, perhaps?
Yeah.
You also mentioned the moth example as well. The kettlebells moth example. Yeah, it's actually a simple example, because that only involves one mutation. And I believe they identified the mutation. It's a transposable element that landed in one gene, if I'm not mistaken. You can probably look up the paper. I can look up the paper for you later on if you want me to look it up. But as far as I'm aware of, that mutation occurred before the industrial change that made the trees black. So the variation was in that example, the variation was probably already there before the environmental change that was responsible for the increased prevalence of the phenotype, the melanin phenotype.
Right. So if it was a variation that was already there, then how is that, an evolutionary process helping an animal adapt to its environment?
Well, in that case, you also when you say adaptation, what we mean is that you have a phenotype. You have a phenotype that is better suited for a particular environment relative to a different phenotype. In our case, the melanin phenotype, or the black moth, is better adapted than the white phenotype, and you have no dispute on this, right? You know that the black phenotype has a better chances of evading predators.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, yes. But that's the thing, is that that population varies up and down based on the environment, right? But so that's just animals dying off, right?
But that is the mechanism for adaptation, according to the evolutionary process, at least. Yeah.
But from what is already present. So there's already black moths, there's peppered moths, pollution goes up. Yeah. The black moths survive.
The variant that is better adapted to a particular environment exists before the environment, although it existed at a low frequency.
See, I mean, this is Nestle, I feel like you're contributing to this argument. Do you see what I'm saying? You're kind of proving the point.
I'm not seeing in your mind, if the mutation happened during the environmental change, that would be a better example of adaptation in your mind.
Yeah, but that's the thing, is that we don't know how that variation got there. I mean, it's an
Well,
assumption
it's a
that it's a mutation.
transposable element. Like we have found the again.
Right, but
I'm just
transposable elements are also, there's assumptions that are made about those, right? Like we know that that is something that is present in the animal, and it may even, be enacted by the organism to help it survive in a certain environment. But that is from what's already present in the organism, right?
Oh,
So like,
in that case, it wasn't like again, it wasn't already present because the mutation of at least in this case, the transposable element inserted itself into a specific region within a gene that is associated with the color phenotype. But it's so we know that this mutation happened at some point.
where does the mutation part come in?
Transposable element insertion, you mean?
No, you said we know this mutation happened. So like evolution's trying to build everything from mutations, right? So like, I mean, maybe I'm misunderstanding you, but you think that at some point there was a mutation that led to these different organisms.
Well, again, I think you're moving away from the math example that I
So
was just giving.
okay, let me go back to the transposable element. Transposable
Yeah.
element's already there, right? Okay, so
No,
the
it
transposable
wasn't.
element moved and inserted itself.
It wasn't there before the insertion within the gene.
Right, but I mean, transposable elements move around,
Well,
right? So
And
I mean,
exactly,
it's already existed.
that's my point because it wasn't in the gene before until a point. So that change happened before it wasn't in the gene, and now it is in the gene.
But it was always part of what the organism had as its toolkit for life.
I'm not sure what you mean by that because it wasn't there in the gene right before. That's my point.
Yeah, but are there rules about,
Well, if you say like, oh, it already like the transposable element, the copy was already there before it was inserted into this particular genome. Like if you want to say that, oh, by that logic, it's not new, then nothing is new anymore because it's just a rearrangement of atoms always. So once you get down that road, you can say nothing is new. So what is new in your mind? Like if a transposable element insertion within a gene is not new, then what is new? What is a mutation?
That's exactly what I'm trying to figure out. What is new? Is there anything new? Because that's the thing that I may have been duped about for all these years. I may have been totally duped into thinking that, we can get these new things that help organisms adapt to their environment. I might have been duped about that. So I'm trying to figure out, what is new? Or is it all God already had it? God already
accept as
created
new?
it like that?
Like what would you accept as new? Like you apparently a transposable element insertion within a gene is not something new in your mind. So what would be an example of something new in your mind?
Well, that's what I'm not sure about. That's what I'm trying to figure out. I'm trying to do this without imagined scenarios. So,
well, I'm just trying to figure out like what is your hypothesis? Like, oh, I have a mutation or a change in the genome. How would you say that is a new change, or that's not a new change? Like, what? How do you tell the difference between a change that is new or not new?
Well, I guess if there's a disease that doesn't exist, and then, there's a mutation that happens that causes a disease that didn't exist before, then we could call that new. Right? And I'm still open to the idea that goes in the other direction, that we can have a mutation that leads to a good change. But what I'm not sure about is I'm not sure that there's an example of a change like that has helped an organism adapt to its environment that we can know without making assumptions about the organism's history.
So, so in your example, if a change leads to a new disease that didn't exist before, so just to summarize, if a change results in a new phenotype that did not exist before, that's new according to your criteria.
Yeah.
So, but by that logic, the kettlewell moth is an example of it. Like it led to a new phenotype that didn't exist before.
But when did it go from not existing to existing?
Well, exactly when I'm not sure. Like I have to look up the paper that identified the mutation. I believe they I can conclude that the insertion event of the transportable element occurred before the Industrial Revolution happened, or at the very least before the whole change of the forest turning black. At the very least, so I have to look at the paper up if you want me to look it up.
Right, but how would they know that?
Well, this is also something that we discussed before about the ERVs. Like ERV, when an ERV inserts itself, it has what's called a target site duplication, and based on that, they can estimate the time of when it inserted itself in the genome.
Yeah, so isn't that based on the assumption that, like, so it seems to be assumption based, not observation based.
Well, we also have historical data that we didn't detect this black moth phenotype before then. Of course, it might have been present long before the Industrial Revolution. It was a very rare occurrence. But then after the Industrial Revolution happened, then in that environment, the black phenotype survives better than the white phenotype, and that is what we mean by adaptation, of course.
Yeah, but I mean, that's again, so like first, if we just, let's say we didn't see any black moths before the Industrial Revolution, okay? There's lots of things that we didn't see, and then we find it, oh, we just found
Right.
this new species. It didn't mean that it didn't exist just because we
Right,
never seen it.
exactly. Like I'm not saying that we didn't observe this because it wasn't there. Like I've made the argument that it probably was there before
Yeah.
the Industrial Revolution. Yeah.
Right. And so what I'm saying is, how would we know, like, so if it's there and then it's still there, and okay, maybe the population fluctuates, maybe this year there's more black ones, the next year there's more peppered moths. Okay, but when do we ever see evolutionary progress happening?
Well, progress. I wouldn't say progress, at least. So that's a term I like to avoid. I would say I would say just a process of change. Change. Like the basic definition of evolution is a change in allele frequencies, or at least if we want to be more basic than that, we can just say it's a change in the features of a population as an aggregate. So if we see at one point, oh, this phenotype is most common, and then at another point, this phenotype is more common, we can ask ourselves, oh, why did the population change? Like we can ask ourselves, look, oh, maybe the moths did not become black because of natural selection. Maybe it's just a byproduct of the pollution. Maybe they just turn black because of the environment polluting the wings, for example. So we can do more experiments with that. But then scientists did experiments determining that actually the black phenotype is a heritable phenotype. It's not just from pollution of the environment. It's an inherited aspect. And then they can also determine that the black phenotype is more difficult to observe by birds, so that it's more likely to survive predation. And those results fit within the hypothesis that this change from white being the most common phenotype to black being the most common phenotype, that change is a result of natural selection.
Yeah, I guess, but the thing that I'm questioning here is, can an organism adapt to its environment by evolutionary processes, not by what is already available to the organism?
Again, you say it as if those two things are incompatible. I'm saying, like, no, the latter thing you mentioned, that the existing variation is part of the evolutionary process.
And see, that's the part that I am starting to get the feeling I got duped about, because I let what is already God-made variation, God-made, abilities in reproduction, and that, the different ways that we can naturally get that because of what's present. And I let that get baked in to the evolutionary story, so that evolutionists get credit for their evolution that doesn't really belong to them, right? Like it's credit they shouldn't get, because
why do you think that existing variation does not give credit to evolution?
Why should it? Give me a reason why existing variation gets to count for evolution.
Because that has been pretty much for a very long time a part of the evolutionary thesis. Like even in Darwin's day, he would actually say that the existing variations matters in his postulation of natural selection. So it's not that, again we go back to this whole misconception that when there is a need for a mutation, that is when the mutation happens. No, mutation constantly happens whether it is needed or not, and then that establishes a variation which can facilitate further adaptation in the future or not. That's the
idea. But I mean, for me overall, with evolution, that is an like extremely implausible scenario, because what we're talking about with mutations, we see the negative effects that they have, and what they need to do is go in the opposite direction for evolutionary progress. They need, thousands of mutations, and thousands of mutations that happen just right with no bad ones, just the good ones happen, and they happen to work together in concert with other mutations that are happening in other genes to even get a single feature. So the whole evolutionary scenario is like absurd. But I had embraced this idea that, well, these small changes, like, okay, the polar bear, yeah, mutation happened, now they have white fur, no big deal. But now I'm seeing, wait a minute, is it really that simple? Maybe I've given too much credit to evolution when it's all just, I mean, there's no problem with saying, okay, certain variations that are already present, some survive better than others, and the ones, that the ones that are better at reproducing will stick around. But there's no substance there. There's nothing there. Like, there's no
again, I would say that like the existing variation is the substance, or at the very least, part of the substance of the evolutionary thesis. So
okay, when does it, how much of it is, like, what I mean is, like, when is it not the existing variation?
Again, if we go back to the moth example, we are not saying that the moth became black because it needed to be black at this point, What we are saying is the variation already existed beforehand, and then the environment selected for the phenotype that's more suited for the particular environment. That is the explanation of how certain phenotypes become more frequent over time as the selection process continues. It is not we're not saying that the mutation happens because it is needed. It's one of the most common misconception that mutations arises out of a need, and they don't.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad that you're being consistent with that, because actually you're right that according to evolutionary theory, it's not supposed to be need-based. But what's really interesting is that our scientific observations seem to be pointing to changes happening that are need-based. And so it's giving us a clue that actually what we might have said were random mutations are actually induced mutations that, intentionally done by the organism to adapt. And so that is, again, what's already available and
Well,
present to the organism.
well, I would not, for the most part, my thinking is that mutations are like undirected for the most part. Like there may be a few rare examples where you have, like for example, if you put a population in an environment A, and you see like, oh, this particular mutation has a frequency of 1%. So 1% of the population gets this mutation. But if you put it in an environment B, then most often you won't see a change in frequency regarding that mutation. So, or you might be able to see an increase in overall mutations, regardless what type. It doesn't matter what type. Maybe you will see an increase or decrease in mutation rates, regardless of location in the genome. But then you may get an example of where you have, this particular mutation increases in frequency depending on the environment, and very specific. I have not seen an example of that. Or maybe there's like an old paper that I may be forgetting, but those examples tend to be very rare for my thinking. For the most part, mutations don't. The rate of a specific mutation does not change regardless of the environment.
Okay, now if it turns out, Neslig, that the more evidence we gather, that you start finding out that mutations do seem to be need-based and directed, would that change your perspective about evolution? Would it cause you to question evolution?
For question evolution as a whole,
Yeah.
probably not.
Is there anything that would cause you?
It would just mean that there is one additional mechanism that can contribute to the evolutionary process. Because again, one of the old hypotheses among, during the early 20th century, direct mutations was one of the hypotheses argued for evolution. It was just like over time that evidence did not bear out, and I'm not familiar with anything today that bears out that mutations are directed. For the most part, they appear to be undirected. For the most, and I think you would all agree with that, right? I think again, I hear most creation would say most mutations are deleterious.
Yeah. So when we're talking about random
if they are directed, then why are most deleterious?
Right. But the thing is that for you guys, you say that basically any change is called a mutation, right? So
that is actually that is the definition of a mutation, actually. Right. So yeah.
But so I will use your definition, but I would say I wouldn't see these as random mutations, but I do think there is evidence that there, and I don't have them off the top of my head because I haven't looked at this in a little while, but there is evidence. I mean, maybe we could say the lactose thing happening, the lactose tolerance, it seems to be a thing that is intentional.
Oh,
But I don't know.
why do you
mean-
think that? It's intentional?
Well, and that's the thing is I'm right now, because of my maybe paradigm shift on this issue, I have to question whether I have that knowledge from evolutionary assumptions or if we have actually observed this. Because, okay, we observe some people who have lactose tolerance, some people that have lactose intolerance. We observe that, some of them have these genetic switches on and off or whatever. So, but I don't know how much of that, what I'm saying, is
Well,
based on the evolutionary assumptions. So I would have to look into it.
well, like I would just point out that like in a modern time, the dairy products have like increasing prevalence all over the world, right? So there is, in some sense, there is a greater need to be lactose tolerant than ever before, because the dairy products are now almost everywhere in the developed world, at least. But we don't see lactose intolerant people suddenly becoming lactose tolerant overnight from that.
Yeah.
Right?
I don't know. Do we?
All right.
Do we not? I mean, I honestly don't know.
I would guess if that happens on a regular basis, then we would know, because then we can, people suddenly become lactose tolerant and they can like enjoy ice cream all of a sudden. Like that would be pretty common knowledge for my for my understanding.
Well, but what we do see is that in places where lactose is eaten and drinking a lot, then they tend to have the lactose tolerance. And then so like, and you don't know which came first, right? Like, do they eat it because they can and the other cultures don't eat it because they can't? Do you know what I mean? The other populations, or did the eating of it cause the thing, and then it would be a need-based change?
For what I understand is, again, I'm doing it from memory, but from what I understand is that these cultures first consumed dairy products as a after they fermented. I don't know, that's not the term. They first processed it, the bacterium that digested the lactose before they, like yogurt, for example. They consumed yogurt before the milk, but then over time they became the lactose tolerant mutation happened, and then suddenly they could drink the milk without the processing. But then again, I think I do need to go soon. It's been over time for me.
Yeah, thank you for talking. I
All right.
appreciate you coming on. I haven't seen you in a while.
All right, take care. Sorry about the rambling.
What? No, you were great. No, it was perfect. Thank you. Appreciate you coming on.
All right. See you maybe later. I don't know, but I have the time.
Okay. Bye.
Take care.
Okay, so I want to see what's going on in the comments. I'm going to go all the way back to the beginning because I think there were some good comments. Thank you all for watching. Thank you for your conversations in the chat. I've seen a little bit of it. It's been kind of fun, but I was trying to mostly concentrate on what was being said. So yeah, let me just see. I think I starred some comments here. So, okay, I'm just going to start with the most recent ones then that I wanted to star. Jonah says, so if things were created, how do we get variation? This question is so weird. Well, I mean, why is it so weird? I don't understand why it's so weird. If nothing ever changes, why do we have variances in population? Well, I mean, the idea is that there's variation built in to organisms, and it looks like, good. All right, cool. XO is joining. So hey, how are you?
Hey, great job today. Well done. And some of us are very impressed with what you've done, because it's not been tapped into, and you have found a gold mine that nobody else knows about right now, Rebecca. And I just hope you're ready for that tidal wave, because you're realizing by letting them try to explain this adaptation claim, you realize that the evidence piles up for you, because they continuously just admit that they're talking about things staying the same or keeping what already exists. And it's like, wow, we had no idea. I felt this exact same way about 8 years ago. basically through being, I would say, not a gardener, but I used to raise a lot of different plants and animals, tortoises, Chinese water dragons, Egyptian papyrus, and a few other things, that I realized this just by, being in the yard and getting dirty with plants and animals. That way, everything is dependent on the fact that it already has the ability. And the more you dive into this, the more you're going to realize that the reason why this is so important, Rebecca, is because it removes all that confusion and all of those pseudo-intellectual terms and all of the nuances, because that actually gives them traction. And what the evolutionist relies on is confusion. So when we keep it basic like this, it crushes the entire paradigm, because their entire foundation literally collapses from underneath them. And some of them were being honest. They absolutely know and absolutely depend on that term, adaptation. They must and do and absolutely require that adaptation takes place, because that is literally the foundation of their religion. And if you don't believe me, all you got to do is look up Darwin. He's the one that coined that phrase, the best adapted to their environment. So it's been right under our noses this entire time. And for some reason, we all agree. Why did Christians, I don't use that term creationists. That's another fallacy. We don't have time for that. We're all creationists, by the way. Why did Christians fall for that idea that things are going to get better when we read in Genesis 1, God said it was good, Rebecca, not that it's going to get good, not that it's going to develop, not that it's going to get smarter, better, stronger, faster. No, actually, it's the exact opposite, Rebecca. Everything's getting worse. We're only losing. Rather, there were 6 different kinds of bears on the ark, or one, neither option is going to help them. They're in big trouble. And I'm so impressed that you have tapped into this. And this is uncharted territory, uncharted waters, because so many intellectuals just passed over this. Like you were explaining it, they all assumed, oh, okay, whatever, we'll allow that part. Wait a minute, we're allowing that? Why would you allow a little bit of the deception, right? So the next thing is that when you have them define their terms, which none of these people today, you let them off easy. You were very gentle and kind with them. Not a single one of them was even able to give us a definition, because it's the same definition. It's all based on the same fantastic paradigm that things magically get better because they didn't have an ability. In the world of science and technology or engineering, that's the opposite of reality, Rebecca. And this is just common sense. A child knows this. When we're small, we understand these things. Then we become larger, we grow, and we think we're smart, and we start losing our common sense. And that's what happens to this world. And this world has gone insane, and they have fallen for it. So good on you. And I hope to see you speak about this in the near future, because if you continue on this path, you're going to realize that this is going to give you a power like you never expected. So again, God bless you for that.
Thanks. Well, I told you I'm still not sure about it, but I will say, like, you coming on, very rarely does someone cause that much of a possible paradigm shift for me. Like, I can't even think of another example.
Amen.
Of it. So I
Amen.
give you credit for being clear about your point, and for really pushing exactly where you needed to push to get me to see the point. Because if you heard me talking, I don't know if you heard me say this, but I said, when you came on and I was pushing back about the polar bear, as soon as the words were coming out of my mouth, I realized the problem. I knew I was in trouble. And I was like, oh my gosh, is he right? And then I've just continued to think about it, and I'm still not sure about it. Like I said, it takes me a little while to change my mind.
Amen.
About something
Good.
this big. I mean, this is something I've
Amen.
believed
Excellent.
for, maybe like 30 years. You know what I mean? So like unraveling it'll take some time if
Amen.
it's true, right? And so, but
Exactly.
I think you have hit on something important. But I have to ask you, and I hope you don't mind sharing this, because what I heard you say, because I looked at your channel and I heard you have a conversation with someone where you said you didn't believe in God. The way you came to know God, you first realized evolution was not true, and
You
then
nailed
that
it.
led you
Exactly.
to God.
That's exactly right. Yeah, 17 years ago, and it took me several months. You've been doing this new thought process for a week. It took me several months to literally gather myself, to literally realize what I was going to do with myself. Yeah. Because I literally was testing, just like you're testing this further understanding. It's kind of like one day you're able to ride a bike. That's a great thing. But, flying a helicopter is a different level of vehicle. And that's what this is. This is a different level of understanding. You're actually simplifying and you're cutting off fat. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm impressed that you heard that as well. Yeah, one of my testimonies is just that. Once you realize that evolution is a lie, you have no other option to realize that this is a special creation. And I'm not saying that everybody's going to do that, though. That's not the same solution for everybody. It's just my testimony. And thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah, and I love that because actually the whole purpose, like the thing that drives me on my channel is that I want people to know God. And I think this evolutionary lie is blocking people from recognizing the creator. And so,
Yes.
it's awesome to me to hear that somebody's testimony like this, because I strongly suspect that there's a lot of people like you that if they suddenly had the blinders taken off
Yes.
and they knew that evolution wasn't true, there would be no doubt in their mind about God's existence.
Right. So you also must realize this, though, that I'm not asking for anybody's money. I won't accept donations. I'm just a child of God, and I'm not going to go into too much about myself. We can say that we have all the time in the water world for that. That's what my ministry is called. We call it Water World. Of course, Jesus is the fountain of living waters. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So this might be a side topic for you, but the word heaven in Hebrew is shamayim, and it actually means water over there. So the word water was the first positive indication in the entire word of God. And that's what heaven means, water over there. So you read in Psalms 148, there's waters above heavens. So there's waters beyond our existence that we can't even fathom, right? And of course, like I said last time, I don't know if I mentioned this to you, like we didn't know until the 60s or 70s that there was fountains of the deep in the earth, right? That were mentioned in Genesis 6. We didn't know that there was geysers in the earth, shooting up water. We didn't have technology, but for some reason, the word of God 3,490 years ago knew about the fountains of the deep, shooting up. So I would say that, the Lord God brings these revelations to us, Rebecca, and just like he's working on you, he's still working on me. Don't think I'm in the clear and I'm a smart guy. Every day I have to improve and get better, and I get closer to the Lord by reading his word. Psalm 119, for those that don't know what I'm talking about, the word of God is still supersedes all of man-made wisdom, and I believe that there's more science in the Bible. That's actually how I got to my conclusion, Rebecca. He showed me the biology by reading his word. It actually wasn't listening to men or man's teachers for the most part. He was actually listening to the word of God. And it dawned on me in Genesis 1 that he had made all things good. And like, well, that's it. They can only get worse. They're not going to get better, right? When God says it's good, we can look around now. You can probably look at, family members, or even, dare I say, men in your life, just like I can look at people in my past life, that we can only determine that things are getting worse over time. And ultimately the wars and the destruction that we see on media, that the world is in chaos. This idea of evolution is the exact opposite. It's demanding that because of problems, things are getting better, which is literally the opposite of everything we know in reality. So it's not just the engineering, it's not just the logic, it's all of biology, Rebecca, that has been screaming at us this entire time. When we have a problem in genetics, there has to be a 1 in a billion chance for the thing to survive. When they're talking about these changes, all of the changes that we can observe are actually problematic. So if we were to try to put the Chihuahua or, the Dachshund and the 101 Dalmatians back in the forest, they wouldn't survive at all. It'd be over. With the chipmunks and the hummingbirds would be laughing at them like, what are these? These things are just messes. They're at the end of the gene pool. That's not how. Now we might be able to help a Chihuahua or a dachshund live with us, right? If we take care of that creature, right? But out in the wild, it's the opposite. A good example is the liger and the tigon, right? When we mix these different breeds, remember the word is breed, they lie and say they're species. They're not species because they're still interbreedable. Remember, their definition is that they have to be able to make successful new offspring? Well, yeah, they do. They're called ligers and tigons, and they have several different combinations in zoo. By the way, that only happens under man-made interbreeding, right? It doesn't happen in the wild. If we were to release the tigon or the liger back into the wild, what would happen, Rebecca?
Well, I don't know,
It,
but
it wouldn't
might
find a husband or wife. It'd be over. The gene pool would be. So again, every example that they claim is the opposite of adaptation, let alone evolution. I don't even have to use that word evolution. I ask a very simple question. Show me an example of adaptation in nature. And just like today, you got a bunch of double takes. Like, wait a minute, what's this lady talking about? You guys don't believe it. And this argument is so powerful, it shocks them into a new discussion now. We're no longer being intellectuals. We're trying to keep it at a very fundamental basics. And now we can actually explain these things to children instead of confusing them. What do you think it does to these children in school when they're taught, oh yeah, these animals adapt? Well, they're going to eventually believe in evolution, Rebecca. That's the honest reality here, is that they eventually attach the two ideologies, which are the same. Well, if you convince a child that magically dogs, paws changed, or a giraffe's neck got longer, or an elephant developed tusks, how does a creature develop tusks or horns, Rebecca? Because it died for millions of years, and that's how. No, that's the opposite. Everything that they use for an example is the opposite. When I was a child, I used to look at these pictures of dinosaurs, and I looked at the horns of the Triceratops, and this obviously was a calling for me later. I used to wonder, how does the Triceratops have horns to defend itself? Why would it develop those? Well, duh, it wouldn't have if it kept dying and needed them, Rebecca, right? So everything they teach us is the exact opposite, right? The creatures have horns because they are already designed with those features to be used. Imagine trying to tell people that, no, they just kept dying. They kept getting eaten by lions or tigers or bears or the Tyrannosaurus Rex, and that's how it developed horns? Wow, we got to be really insane. So that makes you realize how stupid and how insane the intellectual mind of a man is. And the creationists have fallen for this. They have gone along with these pseudo-intellectual terms, whether it's horizontal gene change or transfer or microevolution. Wait a minute. So you're saying microevolution is true, but macro isn't? You don't think that's going to confuse the children, Rebecca? That's an absolute deception to the nth degree. When you teach microevolution is true, but macro isn't, that is so bad. That is so wrong. Go ahead.
Well, I wanted to ask you because, I thought the best person who brought like something that brought a question to my mind was Dr. Thompson, who was talking about, okay, this dog has this ability, and I gave him possible scenarios otherwise, but what I wanted to hear what your response was. I don't know if you were paying attention or if you were listening and if you were like doing stuff in the chat. So do you know what I'm talking about? The argument he was making?
Well, no, because he wasn't able to even tell us when the adaptation occurred. He was giving a lot of examples of things staying the same or keeping what they already have. So you'd have to be able to explain it to me now. You would have to tell me what was his example of adaptation in nature. And mind you, I'm going outside of nature and I'm allowing these people to use selective breeding, which is actually out of the paradigm of evolution. So we're actually going to allow that, and you'll still see that they're going to hit a brick wall. So just try to explain it, and we will literally run into that brick wall together. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay. Well, so, okay. Now, of course, he's assuming common ancestry of all dog breeds to do this. Okay. Which doesn't seem like an outlandish assumption, right? I mean, do you think all dog breeds had a common ancestor?
If they do, that's fine. Yes. We can get a lot of dog breeds from two parents. How many dog breeds can we get from zero parents, Rebecca?
Well, you're not going to get any.
Exactly. So what's my claim would be, yes, it's more likely that we can get all the dogs from two wolves. That's a possibility. It's not, and it absolutely not possible in any way, shape, or form in a court of law to get any dog breeds from no wolves or no dogs. So you see, they're trying to trick us with these terms as if that hurts my claim. That doesn't hurt my claim. It can be 2 dogs or it can be 20 dogs. It's not going to help evolution or adaptation, especially. Watch, I'll run it down with you. Now, you'll have to be able to try to explain it. But again, I don't mind find the assumptions, but watch what's going to happen. I'm going to show you how it's always impossible. Go ahead.
Okay, so he's saying, look, we compare these different dog breeds. This dog breed has this particular allele that no other dog breed has. And so, go ahead.
Oh, okay. So it has something now. Okay, well, okay, but I'm just looking for the claim though. So we're claiming we have a living creature now. By the way, we can't even give it a name for some reason. What are we going to call it? I mean, are we going to call it Fred, a border collie, a Chihuahua?
Well, yeah, it's some
Tyson?
kind. Look, he mentioned a lot of different dogs, so I don't remember the particular type. But he did.
So we don't even have a concise claim from him. So you'll have to help him out, Rebecca. Notice how you're always going to have to help them make the claim. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, if we went back and we rewatched it, you will see he's making a particular claim about a particular dog breed. Okay. And it is some kind of herding dog. Okay. So he's saying that particular dog breed has this, certain allele that none of these other dog breeds have. It has these like things that we've seen are able to help with the herding, and the other dogs don't have it. So this looks like something that developed. Okay.
I would point out that the parents already had it, and if he wants to go to court and tell me the parents didn't have it, let's go to court, and he will be flat on his face being laughed at by the entire jury, because we all know that the dog, no matter what it is, just like all creatures, is only going to pass down the previous traits. Like we can have a female wolf and a male German Shepherd actually breed and bring forth a new breed, because it is splitting the difference from the parents. In fact, they could have a litter of 6 or 7, and 6 of them can be white, 1 of them can be black, or vice versa. When I was raising cats, I would have literally 4 or 5 different variations from the 2 parents. You'd have one parent would be like a reddish calico, and then I would have a mackerel dad. And one of the cats was even, or 2 or 3 of the cats were white, some were orange. Neither parent was orange or white, but we know that the genetics already existed within the parents. So if he's trying to make a claim that the parents didn't have that DNA, wow, he would win the Nobel Prize for evolutionists to prove that reality of evolution, but he can't. That is a baseless claim based on the fantasy that because he's desperately trying to find an example. If you were to test the parents, it's called a DNA test. If the DNA matches the children, well, that's not going to help the adaptation claim. And if it doesn't match the children, you got the wrong doggy. So it doesn't matter what you do. You see, that is a fantastic, ridiculous claim. If he's claiming that, you'd have to have him repeat it, and he's not going to be able to, because now I need to see a source. Are you going to cite me a source where the parents didn't have the information that the babies do? Good luck with that. It's never happened in all of history, but you happen to find the one guy to do it, Rebecca. I guess you guys will be millionaires. And I'll be retired. So when he can do that, I will retire, and then he can be a billionaire. Guess what? Not going to happen. I've been doing this for 10 years. We have a lot of fantastic, ridiculous claims from men that play make-believe. I bet men can lie. They lie really well. That's the only thing that we're good at, is lying, Rebecca. And when you give yourself up to the Lord, you don't have to lie anymore and make up any more fantasies about dogs giving birth to children that have new DNA. It's always based on pre-existing information within the gene pool. There's never going to be an exception to this, Rebecca. The cat's already out of the bag. Sorry, guys. But adaptation is another fantasy that they've used. Darwin said it best. What's best adapted to its environment. What happens when something is not already able to live in its environment? Rebecca, you mentioned it. It dies. So no matter what, if it is able to survive, then it already had the ability. If it dies, neither option have anything to do with adaptation. This is a tautology that we as deceivers use to propagate our deceptions. Go ahead.
No, I don't have anything else to say to that. I mean, I'm thinking it over. That's all.
Amen.
Your friend, one of your friends is backstage, so I think I want to try to bring her on, because she's been waiting back there for a little while.
Let her up. Amen. And it's your show. We can talk. Is it okay if we talk in the future, Rebecca?
Of course. Yeah.
Well, then I don't want this to be our last. I don't want to give all my secrets away just yet. Yes, I'm the XO. I don't even want to discuss how I got that name. So God is too good to me, Rebecca. I do not deserve the miracles that he's given to me. I am a preacher, that, as you can tell, and that's my friend Kenesha. So go ahead and have a nice chat with her, and I will see you in the future, Rebecca. It's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you for allowing me to speak on your channel, and God bless you.
Thank you. God bless you.
Amen. God bless.
Hi, Miss Rebecca.
Hey, how are you, Kanisha?
I'm blessed. I'm very blessed. Thank you. I just think you're doing a fantastic job. I also am a YouTuber, and I have these discussions regularly, and I'm always saying, like, where's all the ladies at? Like, why is it always men? Like, so EXO had sent me this, or your channel, I think it was yesterday or today, can't remember. But I got so excited because I was like, wow, there's somebody else who knows the Lord who is doing this. So kudos to you, sister.
Cool, thank you. Well,
Yeah.
I'll have to check out your channel.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I shared yours. I was like, man, this girl's got to be heard. Well, you're not a girl, but this woman's got to be heard. I mean, you're doing a really good job, honestly. But the whole thing with the adaptation, I missed a lot of your live stream, so I do apologize for that. I fell asleep almost near having a child, so I'm very tired in my pregnancy right now. But
Oh, wow.
what is what was the gentleman saying? The guy earlier, the first guy that you had on about adaptation with the polar bears? I know you had brought up polar bears, but
Yeah, I don't really remember what he was saying about okay, well, I had the polar bear conversation with several people, so I'm not sure, if you're talking about Dr. Thompson. He was the first one I talked to about it. Is that who you're talking about?
it might be. I missed so much of it. I'm sorry. I try to
Okay,
watch it
well,
on 2X, but yeah,
yeah.
the whole problem with adaptation, number one, every time that I talk to an atheist about adaptation, they're talking about something like microevolution, right? Which is like small changes. But the small changes that they're talking about, it's really silly to me because it could be something as small as the hair color changing or the eye color changing. I've heard a lot of different um, how do you say explanations of adaptation, but really that's not adapting, that's genes doing exactly what genes do, because genes have millions and millions of codes. These things, the DNA is a written code, and so can you only imagine all the different variations that you can have from the existing DNA that is there? It's not
Yeah.
adapting to anything. It's something that's already existing there, that when it meets with this one and it meets with this one and it comes together, you just got a new recipe. You know what I'm saying? So it's really strange to hear the whole adaptation argument, because there's never anything that is convincing to me. And this is me coming from before I was a Christian, I was an atheist, and it just, even then, as it's just something doesn't make sense. Something's off about this whole thing, because isn't that DNA just doing what DNA does? Chromosomes do what chromosomes do.
Yeah. So,
So
and then what happened? You started to question?
actually, I got my ex-husband, we were watching an uh Discovery Channel. Sorry, my brain's all tired. I just woke up. That's why I'm so late. But we were watching a Discovery Channel, and it's a millions of years ago, billions of years ago, something like that. And he scoffed, and I was like, "Why do you always scoff when we watching this stuff?" He's like, "Because the Earth isn't billions of years old." I said, "Yes, it is. The science says so." And anyway, so we started going back and forth, and he started making claims saying it's in the Bible. And I said, well, I'm going to go buy a Bible to prove you wrong, but that's actually not in the Bible, even though I never read a Bible a day in my life. And God hooked me right there. I never sat that Bible down and changed my life or gave my life to Christ.
Awesome.
Yeah. So joke's on me.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
cool. And so what is the theme of your channel? What are you trying to accomplish on your channel?
Oh, I want everybody saved. So I have everyone from atheists to Muslims to Jehovah's Witness to Mormon to Catholic to agnostic. It doesn't matter. Everyone comes on my channel, and I host like an open panel, and we talk about anything. Everything's on the table here. But really, I always have the Bible on the screen, and we're gonna get right to the Bible, and we're gonna actually talk about it. But I'm willing to talk to anybody about any subject. And when I don't know things, plenty I don't know, I'll look into it and then I'll host another live stream after I've looked into it. But as long as I'm, showing the word of God and, trying to let people know, like, hey, you're not too far gone. I know it's confusing. I was once there. I try to just demonstrate to people as much patience as possible, because God was patient with me while I was in my ignorance as well. So, um, just giving a platform for people to talk about it without screaming. Like, nobody comes on screaming on my channel. They know the rules, and we can just all talk despite the differences. And it's amazing what God is doing, because a lot of people are giving themselves to Christ. Actually, there was a Muslim the other day who said, I can no longer deny Christ. A Muslim said that. That's huge.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
That's really cool. Yeah.
how
Nice.
often are you going live?
I maybe like once a week. Sometimes once every 2 weeks if something comes up. So
Okay.
yep.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely have to catch you more. Sorry I'm so late, Rebecca. I was listening to you with the previous guy. Um, you're just doing a fantastic job. You just keep it up.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Well, I won't keep you on. You probably are closing out right now, but thank you for having me on, and we'll talk. We'll talk very soon.
Sounds good. Okay.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for
Bye
coming
bye.
on. Bye. Okay. Well, yeah, we've been going for like 2.5 hours now, so it probably would be good to close up. I just want to say hi to a few people in the chat because there's been a lot of people here supporting. Thank you guys. And some people may not be here anymore, but hey, Mr. Green, good to see you. Hey, Wesley. Wes had a lot of stuff to say, so let me see what Wes has to say. He says technically mutations don't happen at a population level. Technically, a population is defined by its status as a group of individuals. Okay. Yeah, I know you have a lot of comments here, and I'm going to look through some of them. Wes, thank you so much. I'm really curious to hear your perspective on this. So if you want to come on and share your thoughts, because it's sometimes hard to understand what somebody's perspective is just from the chat. So I would totally be willing to stay on longer if you want to come on and share your thoughts on this. Because like I said, I am still open. I'm still trying to figure out what's true in this area. And so trying to listen to people that I trust. Jesse says, well, most of the research linked to bat ancestry has to do with genetic comparisons of similar animals. And okay, that's a private conversation. I don't know what's going on with that. Don't know what that's about. But hey, to modal surrealist, what frequencies can you have when you only have 4 genomes? Interesting question, and I don't have an answer to that right now. Tom, hi, good to see you. And Laser Fan, good to see you. Solera Knight, Bongo, thank you. I may not even be hitting everyone. I'm sorry if I pass you over. I'm just trying to look for the ones that I haven't said hi to yet. So, Mr. Green, thank you. Glad you're here. And yeah, if anybody wants to come on, I have a little bit of energy left, and so if you have a difference of opinion on this, please come on and share. And yeah, hey Tyler. Okay, wait. Tyler says XO doesn't understand how evolution works. Okay, well, Tyler, I hope that you're getting a little bit of different perspective by watching this channel. Perhaps they can give us a mechanism by which variation within comes about. The mechanism that we are proposing is that God created. And I think that makes a lot more sense than chemical and physical processes bringing about all the amazing features of life. So, yeah. Tom says if you repeat a lie often enough, it becomes true. People have evolution pounded into their head from a young age. So true. It's amazing how many people do not even think about this. They just have accepted evolution because that's what they've been taught. Is the only thing they've been taught. I mean, you just open up the textbooks and it's crazy how deep and how often that like the evolutionary assumptions are being fed to people. So anyway, thank you all for coming. Thanks for participating. And we may have another stream talking about this topic in the future because it is still something I want to explore. I, don't want to form an opinion quickly. I will say that I have had a lot of trouble over the last week or two, whenever it was that I did the stream. Maybe it was only a week ago, but I really did sit down and try to think of things that I could identify as adaptations that I don't have to make assumptions in order to, know that that was an adaptation. And I realized I can't come up with any. So, I'm still open to people showing me that. How do we know what's our scientific observations that show that something actually adapted to its environment with something it didn't already have, right? Like, of course, I can pull examples right now of things that have adapted to their environments with morphological changes and such. My favorite is the lizards that developed the cecal valve when they got on a plant-based diet. And then when they went back to their meat-eating diet, they lost the cecal valve. But that cecal valve was hailed as this amazing evolution. You can still find videos of it online. You can still find articles that haven't been retracted talking about this amazing evolutionary development of cecal valves. But it turns out that was just an ability that the lizards already had. If they got on a plant-based diet, they could grow the cecal valve. Then if they didn't get off it, they lost it. But that's what's already present. Did that help them adapt to their environment? Yes, but it's something they already had. If we're talking about evolution, we got to get everything to come from what wasn't already there. Okay, so why should we give credit to evolution for what is already an ability that the organism had? So that's what I'm trying to think of. I'm trying to come up with things that would contradict and what XO said. Is there anything? Can we think of something that we can look at and say, yes, this had a mutation plus natural selection, these evolutionary processes that helped the organism actually adapt to its environment? So I challenge you guys to think about that. Think about that. Think if you can get together an example, and before you bring it, think about whether or not it relies on assumptions in order to come up with your scenario. Think about whether you have to appeal to something that is not a scientific observation in order to show that that was an evolutionary process of adaptation to the environment. Yeah. Well, thanks for watching and have a great night. God bless you all.